Hi there, and welcome to this week's discussion on Chapter 14. And so I'm going to try to share my monitor and talk about Chapter 14. So as we go through, let's see here. Um, on Chapter 14, we're going to start there at this first slide and go through. So, defining sex and gender. So, in common usage, the terms sex and gender are used interchangeably. Sex refers to the biological categories of male and female, while gender refers to the cultural or psychological markers. So, most of the empirical research on male female differences and negotiation examine sex differences. So, but use theoretical aspects of gender to account for differences. They're consistent with this pattern, and researchers predominantly rely on the term gender. So, research on gender differences in negotiations. So, large scale reviews of research concludes that women behave less competitively and more cooperative than men. Men tend to negotiate better outcomes than women. The differences, while statistically significant, are small. There may be no simple answers of how gender influences negotiation, but recent research shows the situation matters. Why? The authors of one study concluded that men achieve better average outcomes, but gender differences strongly depend on context. So, why is this? So, let's look at this. Let's break it down. Let's start with relational views of others. Women use interaction goals while men use task specific goals. Embedded view of agency. Well, women see negotiation as a relationship behavior while men separate negotiation from other behaviors. Beliefs on ability and worth. Well, in general, women may feel less comfortable negotiating, while control over power, women may seek to enhance the power of all parties, while men use power to achieve their own goals. They don't have time to think about what the other person is doing or what's going on. They use that power to achieve their goals, and that's what they're about. Problem solving with dialogue. Women engage and listen, whereas men convince and win points. What about perception and stereotypes? Negative female stereotypes shape expectations of men and women. So there's some empirical findings on gender differences in negotiations, and they include men and women conceive of negotiations in different ways. How? Relationships versus tasks, competition versus collaboration. Women are relationship, men are tasks. Competition are men, collaboration is women. So, is the situation perceived as a negotiation opportunity? Well, women really expect lower outcomes from a negotiation. Men and women communicate differently in negotiations. The same behavior may elicit different perceptions of, depending on the gender of the target perceiver of the behavior. So there are differences in perceptions, may lead to differences in style and strategy, where men and women differ when it comes to tactics crossing ethical lines. Gender differences vary with different communication channels and whether the negotiation is under surveillance. Men and women are treated differently in negotiations. Come on now. Simulated negotiations found that female negotiators were perceived as easier to mislead and lie to more frequently. So, for example, automobile negotiations. So, negotiators perceive different offers depending on gender and race. Women and Blacks start at a less favorable position than white males. Research also shows men receive more favorable leasing terms as well. Okay, these are just some examples now, guys. Salary negotiations. So some differences may be due to the propensity to initiate negotiations. So neglecting to initiate salary negotiations can, over a career, lead to significant financial loss. Even when both men and women negotiate over salaries, there's evidence that shows that women fare worse. So, are there empirical findings about this gender differences? Well, similar tactics have different effects when used by men versus women. Exchange tactics had a positive effect on male salary negotiations and a negative effect on female salary negotiations. Both men and women are less likely to be hired when bargaining aggressively, but women are far less likely to be hired. So we can't use that. So stereotype threat affects negotiator performance. Stereotypes undermine the performance of female negotiators. The negative effect on stereotypes about gender differences can be overcome. So, how do you overcome them? So, motivational interventions dilute double standards by emphasizing mutual dependencies. Activating a negative stereotype uh, may motivate people to disprove it. Both genders contradict stereotypes when making good impressions. Cognitive interventions, powerful mindsets can change behavior. Power becomes action, guys. Reframe the nature of the negotiation task into a broader objective. So situational interventions include power differences may be responsible for observed gender differences, as well as in negotiations, power is often a function of alternatives. So do gender differences really exist? Rather than gender differences, another view is differences are rooted in the paradi- paradigmatic barriers to equal outcomes. Excuse me on that. This means that how negotiation is studied and taught tends to bias the understanding of what it means to perform well as a negotiator. So, simulated negotiation focuses on short term relationships, competitive tactics, as well as materialistic outcomes. All male negotiators qualifies. Why? There is a call for change to the dominant negotiation and research paradigm to emphasize long term situations. So, this may give women's strengths a fair chance to shine in this type of scenario. So that's it for negotiations and for women versus men and the different gender versus none. Bottom line, women, their compassionate style, their nurturing style seems to have a big interference with their ability or our ability to negotiate. Being a woman, I have seen these. I can testify that I too, as a woman, until I got negotiations down pat, and probably still to some extent today, I have to watch my wording. I have to understand who I'm talking to at that particular moment and the role I play at that particular time and the position I need to play at that particular time. And so these things do matter when we're talking about negotiations. Something some things have to be dealt with in different ways. One of the women I know that's one of the best negotiators around is my mother. My mom knows how to negotiate. She will go back and forth with people until she gets what she wants. She's nerve wracking, but she understands her power in the particular situation or the transaction. She understands what she has to bargain with, what she went in there with, and how to go about doing it. My mom credits her ability to negotiate by the men that she worked around that taught her how to negotiate. So, negotiation is a crucial part, and communicating is a crucial part of a role as a woman or an individual rising in the ranks in business, any situation, work as well, and how you negotiate, who you're talking to, and what style of communication that we're using.